to the Web3Prof Podcast.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Jarrett here with you at the Web3Prof. Today I am with Tamara Goddard. Tamara is the co-founder of both 400 Drums and For Our Future. Thanks for being with me here today.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jarrett.
So, Tamara, let's just start off with, let's learn about your journey into Web3. How did that start for you?
It really started with us in pre-pandemic. I think it was a bit of a perfect storm. So we were already doing national research on blockchain. And what we were looking for was how to compile Indigenous business data and procurement in a way that didn't require a database. And so that led us into looking at new technology, what was coming about, and writing three national papers on the impact and opportunity that blockchain could bring to our people.
So, and when you say we, you're referring to your organization or your company, For Our Future?
Yeah, absolutely. That was under For Our Future. For Our Future is the research and development behind all of our technology developments.
Okay. And then quickly, what is 400 Drums?
So 400 Drums is the technology. So it's the real life implementation of our research.
Excellent. So before we kind of dive into some questions, can you give us maybe lay a cultural landscape for us as to why you're involved with For Our Future? Why did you co-found it and as well as 400 Drums?
Yeah, absolutely. So my entire life has really been about studying systems. I didn't grow up with my community, but I did get reintroduced at the age of 19 years old. So I really grew up in a system that I didn't understand. And that was for a couple reasons. One, just because of my indigeneity and feeling apart from my culture. But secondly, that was also my neurodiversity. And so I think I got focused on what's happening with the systems that's making the world look confusing to me.
Right.
And so my entire life, like a neurodiverse person, has been hyper-focused on what's going on with the systems in this world and why is it creating upset, angry, stressful societies. When I was reintroduced back to my community, I really dove into the systems, and for 20 years I've researched every possible level of system, from business to nonprofit to income assistance, training, entrepreneurship, to do with Indigenous peoples. I developed the Indigenous economic system. An Indigenous economic system is an economic system that focuses on the growth pattern of nature. And that's how our communities function, by watching nature. So you could say, you know, instead of just having this sort of capitalistic structure, and actually I proved myself wrong during my master's thesis on this, I thought that a wealth sharing system would mean that everybody had a little bit less, but everybody would be doing well.
Right.
The mathematics proved me wrong, because in a natural system, it grows at a growth rate exponentially more powerful than just your standard lineup.
Right.
Because everything is circular. And so imagine that you are a mother tree in a forest, and when you're a little sapling, you're using up a little bit of energy, and you're giving out the same amount. And so an Indigenous economic system is, as that tree grows, is giving out much more resources, but it's also taking in much more resources.
Right.
But it's creating an entire ecosystem around.
Yeah.
So that's one part, is financially it is a superior model. But the second part to that is that it's a wellness model. Naturally, you're creating something that is much more organic and empowering all of the people around you to engage in a community and economic system.
One time you told me that blockchain is very much related to, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but blockchain is very much tied into how Aboriginal people tell stories and how they think. Can you just correct what I just said and tell me what you told me before?
I tend to say that blockchain, so Indigenous people were the original blockchain. And that's because our culture was passed down. So relationship was our bottom line. And when I say relationship, I mean relationship with all our relations. So that's everything earth and everything people. We passed down knowledge orally, but that oral knowledge was embedded, like blockchain does, in our art, in modified trees, in our songs, and in our language. And so we had ways of sort of generationally passing down that knowledge. That knowledge was our wealth. And that's because you might have a medicine patch And you are the person that understands how to heal several nations because you understand how to work with that particular piece of land and all of the medicines. And so that's something that's contributing.
Right.
You pass on that knowledge and it's embedded in our art. So if anybody wanted to understand the legal access to that medicine patch, it would be embedded in a totem pole, in a modified tree, or in a piece of art and language and song. That's where we see blockchain now being the modern way of restoring our oral cultural, our oral culture.
Are you the singular voice in Aboriginal communities in Canada on this, or are there others who have kind of seen the connection here?
I think I'm the only one that's really saying there's something we're missing in nature, and that's everything that we're talking about. Is why are we not paying attention to the way that the ecosystems function in order to restore the earth and restore our relationship with the earth, and understand that we don't all lose when we communicate and support each other and the environment.
Right.
You know, this is not a money-making loss to do so. Yeah.
Okay. So when we think about 400 drums, so the first time I heard about 400 drums was a CBC special I saw on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I'm a drummer, and I've been playing ethnic drums since I was 14. And I couldn't believe that there was an intersection of ethnic drumming and blockchain, because I certainly never, ever imagined that that would be even a thing. And that was in, maybe that was a couple of years ago that I heard about you guys, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then I found out that you're here in Vancouver and all this kind of stuff. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. So, tell us about 400 drums and what is the connection between the art of a drum and the sound of a drum and NFTs and blockchain?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. And I'm going to go a little bit to the pandemic on this, because what happened with David Fierro, who is our drum maker, he was a bit of a case study for us. So we'd already done the research. We understood the opportunity. David was not able, as a cultural teacher, to go into the communities and earn his income as he always had by teaching.
Because of the pandemic.
Because of the pandemic. Right. He couldn't go on to reserve, couldn't hold a class. And so this happened with multiple of our businesses, Indigenous businesses, clients. And then the second part to that is that we had, I'm a sort of an East Van auntie to young people. They grew up a lot in my home. And so what I really noticed is the kids were just breaking down in stress.
Right.
They were all trying to follow the rules. They were being good kids. So here we had a problem. We had youth that needed to be protected and needed to feel like they were inputting into something when it looked like their entire future was just plummeting, environmentally, health-wise, and in every way. So we actually challenged the youth to create a multi-sensory experience of David's drum-making process. We wanted to showcase our art in a way that was digital, in a way that the kids could engage in videography, music, higher education. They weren't able to be in the creative arts programming anymore because that's no fun during a pandemic. So we challenged them. We need a multi-sensory experience of Indigenous art. It was our other team members, Rian Bevan, who was one of our researchers, and then Brandon Dame came along as well. That moved us into the NFT space. And we just went all in on it. We started doing generative NFTs, and what we wanted to do was be in the Web3 space to learn how it went.
Wow.
Right? Because it's hard to learn just philosophically.
Totally.
And now we're creating things that have just never been done before. If we hadn't had taken that leap, we wouldn't be where we are today.
So if I remember correctly, with 400 Drums NFT launch, if you bought a certain number of NFTs, then you got a physical drum. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I also had heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that traditionally Aboriginal artists are not supposed to sell ceremonial art. So by minting some of the art pieces as an NFT, artists were able to generate a source of income by selling the NFT and then gifting maybe the drum itself? Yeah,
the drum winds up getting gifted, correct. It's not this way for all drum makers, albeit depends on which elder you talk to. So our culture isn't just set in stone.
Yeah.
But David in particular, because he hunts, he prepares the skin himself, he makes the red cedar himself. His drums are used all over Canada and the USA for ceremonial drums. And so because of that, and because of the quality, and because you are using real elk hide and real redwood cedar, there's only so many drums to go around.
I see.
Right. So every time we sell a drum or gift a drum, so the NFTs, if you bought I think it was 10 and then 15 NFTs, you would get one of these drums.
Yeah.
I mean, they go to auction in our fundraising, which we're allowed to do, for somewhere between $4,000 and $12,000.
Wow.
But in that, if you can understand, so then I go into the Indigenous economics model and I go, well, we can do this. We can sort of sell digital copies of an eagle feather, and that would fund an artist to be taking apart the eagles and creating ceremonial objects for our people.
Wow. I mean, these drums are not just, I'm going to put some pictures up while we're talking about this so that people can see, because they're not what you would think of as a typical Aboriginal drum in the sense that it has some kind of traditional Aboriginal art. These are like Colourscapes, and they're almost like, for lack of a better term to explain, almost like psychedelic looking. Is that right? Yeah, and our whole team are very much fans of plant medicines as well. The reason we chose that to show, their phosphorescence in the paints. So I'm the color theorist, and that's part of my neurodiversity called synesthesia. Mm-hmm. So it was actually David's idea for me to begin to mix pigments into light colors. And so I loved it, and we've developed our own paints that change in no light, in violet light, and in black light. Wow. They really turn into otherworldly landscapes, and it appeals to the imagination, and it appeals to people to have this multisensory experience of the Indigenous drum. We also recorded the drums. So every drum has its own voice. So they've been professionally recorded, and there's a 1-hour soundtrack, and we're working on the Indigenous sound repository so that people can get a sense of, sound, sight, feeling when you're engaging. But there's another very important reason we didn't put our art on there. And we didn't put the art on there because our stories need to have permission to share. We weren't able to just we didn't have the ability, because of cost, to go through the protocol necessary to be able to share Indigenous specific stories and picture landscapes. That would take much more time. So when you say you didn't get or couldn't get permission, is that something that the artist goes to the elders in their specific community, or do you have to get kind of like a general consensus amongst a bunch of bands, or like how does that actually work? It depends on the story. All people have public stories. I have public stories. I can do my own personal paintings, and they're my public stories. But when I sell those, there's legal aspects. For example, I can sell a piece of my art, but you can never own the story, and you can never own the image. Okay. That's important to understand. If it's I understand what can be shared and not shared. And so an Indigenous artist will also know that. So you can definitely, the Indigenous artists can do that themselves. Okay. If a nation wanted to share something more beyond that, like components of language, there are some of our songs that cannot be shared. There are some of our ceremonies that cannot be shared. Right. So you really just have to know this. Right. And we have a fairly good understanding of that. So. You had, or maybe one of the guys in your team, Brendan or Rian, told me that or let me just get you to tell this. So the art market, you investigated the art market in Vancouver to be $100 million at some point, and there's enormous elements of, I don't know, is fraud the right word? There is, it's not authentic as you would think. Tell us that story. Yeah, sure. We looked at doing authentic Indigenous tagging during the 2010 Olympics. So I had started that, and another fellow from Spiritworks, and ITBC, there were a few people looking at this. We developed a tagging system during the Olympics so that when people came to Canada, they could verify that when they were in Canada and purchasing Indigenous art and craft, it was indeed made by an Indigenous person and appropriate to buy. Yeah. So we did that. That is because at the time of the 2010 Olympics, there was $100 million art market just in Vancouver, literally just downtown. Yeah. And 85% of that was fake Indigenous products. That's unbelievable. Yeah. So this is from China and Indonesia or wherever. Yeah, correct. Mass produced. Correct. And some of the best even carvings, that you'd walk into a gallery and see these beautiful carvings, they were not done at all by an Indigenous person. Wow. But they were selling them as an Indigenous person had made them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where you could actually say that's fraud, because they went to great lengths.
Right.
Like they would have a picture of an Indigenous woman weaving. So you really
Right.
felt that you were buying an Indigenous product, and it had no connection with any, and the other problem with that is the stories are wrong. You're appropriating some of the stories that don't even belong to Indigenous people, or the wrong Indigenous group. So it's confusing.
Yeah. Okay. So then how does digital technology like blockchain technology, like NFTs, how does it help preserve and promote Indigenous art? Yeah,
absolutely. So for the first time ever, we created a physical series called the Four Sacred Medicines. Now, these are public teachings from the medicine wheel. So now what we are doing while we're preparing to relaunch the generative collection is we have minted. So we've created what's called an Indigi seal. And that's a digital seal that we will provide to artists that we know are what do we call that? An Indigenous community will sort of own you. Like they will accept you. If you're not connected with an Indigenous community or a member of the 60s Scoop where you've been removed, there's various ways of knowing that the person's actually Indigenous. We understand how to do that. So we provide them with an Indigi seal. So we created the Four Sacred Medicines along with an Indigenous marketplace. The Four Sacred Medicines was utilized to inspire a line of commercial carpets. So we were able to legally say you can utilize the image for this purpose. We minted those originals to the Indigenous lineage of every artist and the stories. And so what that means is that every time that piece of art sells or moves again, the artists are smart contracted to that. It also copyrights the story to the original Indigenous artist, and then it secures for the buyer of the fine art that it does actually come from an Indigenous person.
Right.
So the value of them buying the collection is much higher and verified.
Wow. And currently, there isn't a system in place that exists that can do something like this outside of blockchain?
No, there is no system. The tagging system was incredibly complicated. If you can imagine how many tags would need to be made.
Right.
We were having to train retailers and galleries how to verify themselves. And that was problematic. And the cost of just printing and getting out was very difficult.
And has this not happened previous because the technology didn't allow for it, or because Aboriginal people didn't have the ability to do it, or they didn't see that it was a problem, or the government didn't see it was a problem? Like, why is it taken? I mean, it's not like Aboriginal art in galleries is just become a thing in the last 10 years. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. So why is it just now that this is like the problem is being solved?
Well, I think that historically, like always, savvy business people saw that there was a lot of value in the Indigenous art community, and the collectors were not aware that this was going on. You know, Indigenous art has been literally money since colonization. We used to trade our art, our baskets, our clothing, our wares as money.
Yeah.
And it was held as money, and it's still held in many museums and governments, and it's never lost value.
Right.
Right. So I just think it was an opportunist thing to do.
Interesting. And do you think that the Aboriginal community, broadly speaking, is open to some type of technology to help these artists make sure that they retain the value of the art that they create?
100%. It's our elders understand this. The blockchain is like a potlatch system. They understand the oral culture to it. We are looking at setting up, we've already put the proposal in to set up a national governance where the artists can come together and continue to ensure that the Indigi seal has merit behind it.
Right.
And we also want to recognize, very important to know that like somebody like the Haida Nation has their own stamp.
Okay.
And so ours is a widespread stamp.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that if the Haida also has a stamp, like you've got the Haida stamp, we'll promote that too.
Right.
So some nations are definitely doing it on their own.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And Haida Nation is in northwestern British Columbia on the coast?
Haida Gwaii.
Haida Gwaii, yeah. And so when you look at the intersection of the technology we're talking about now, which is, I think, pretty revolutionary, and obviously we're speaking about it in a Canadian context, but there's not only Aboriginal people in Canada, but all over the world. So there's obviously a huge opportunity beyond maybe the small the small country of Canada as a use case for this to be used broadly. And so where do you see the future of this type of technology going?
I think we'll have different things probably quarterly now. We're looking at, say, for example, the carpets, commercial carpets. We hope that by next year, once the commercial carpets are installed, you'll be able to walk into a fancy hotel or commercial convention center and hold up your phone and it will come to life through augmented reality.
Wow.
So that's one thing. A second thing is I did read, I think it was the Maori, they posted their whole language on YouTube and a tech company came and stole it, created Indigenous language lessons. And again, it had nothing to do with the Indigenous people.
Wow.
So we need to protect our language.
Right.
There's a lot more of our culture we want to share. And I have subjectively verified this through speaking to our people across Canada. We want to share more information. We just don't want it to be stolen.
Right.
And so our language, we have an artificial intelligence language platform. We will be copywriting that language back to the person teaching the language so that forever it belongs to that language teacher of that nation.
So what does that mean when they're how do you copyright a language to an individual?
Well, I mean, essentially, it's we're working with a fintech where they've created. So we have to create our own protocol system, but we mint it to the language speaker or the artist at the get-go.
So they're like the teacher. So they're benefiting because they're kind of the teacher of the language. So they get, for lack of a better term, a commission when people take maybe the language course.
Yeah.
Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
It allows them to have their language taught online to their own people. And if there's some that they want to share, people pay, they get automatically smart contracted. Same with the art.
Okay. So when we look at the progress that we're talking about here, how can Web3 and this technology promote inclusivity? How can it promote diversity amongst Aboriginal people? What are more steps forward that we see?
For me, I'm very excited to implement the smart contract system because what we're doing actually is taking the knowledge of the cultural keepers, which are elders, say my age and up, the 80s and 90s, and then the young people with technology. So with the Indigenous economics platform, everybody gets smart contracted in. So if you're an 18 to 30-year-old Indigenous youth, we usually don't have a lot of monies. And so we actually take a percentage for them to do the videography. So any part of the technical team, anybody that put into a particular piece of art, the project, because we're storytelling.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a video of the artist talking about the piece. So they get a percentage in royalty. So for me, it's really, this isn't owned by anybody. I never say it's owned by anybody. My economic system was input by 350 First Nations on various research projects.
Okay.
This belongs to everybody, like an ecosystem. So as we develop smart contracting, you're going to see the economic dignity of our people being restored. You're going to see our young people getting commissioned because an art product is selling on a T-shirt as limited edition prints, and they're getting 2 or 3% of every sale. They're going to be able to afford their own schooling. They're going to be able to afford to live in the city, and you're going to see our economics really rise.
And when you say afford, how much value is there in someone, I guess, paying their own way in the sense like, I created this art, I sold it, I made money, I, did this in my own hard work, how important is that?
I think it's everything. Our people just work themselves to the bone and they always want to be doing something that benefits everybody. So we're not very good business negotiators maybe overall. So Indigenous youth, they don't get that sense of learning business and learning value and learning in a Western way or a capitalistic way. We don't get those teachings growing up in our homes.
Okay.
Our people are trading with each other.
Right.
What they will get is how to give things away, how to give their time away, because that's just considered being a good citizen of your nation is to give. What we're saying is keep giving. Let's find new markets. Let's open new markets and you will be royaltied. So in a sense, you get to be an Indigenous person instead of having to go to work. Like right now, you might go to work in consulting, which I've done for years. And then I do all of the Indigenous stuff for whatever anybody can afford. Like that's all it is. We actually raised 90% of the funds 90% of the funds we use to work with Indigenous people, we raise for them.
Right.
And that's before this project. So we have to find a different way to earn monies by knowing our language. How would you ever learn your language as an Indigenous youth if it had no merit for you to be able to feed your family?
Sure.
You know, this is bringing something different.
Wow. I mean, the way you speak about this is so empowering. It gives, you know, personal responsibility to each individual, which I think is incredible. And I think I don't know. It just seems like such a revolutionary approach. And I think that I mean, I feel like so privileged to get to chat with you about this, because I think what you're doing and what your team is doing is like legitimately changing the lives of Aboriginal people.
I really think it is too. And, you know, I think we've considered many of the perks, I guess, for people to be involved with us. For example, if you were a collector, we're looking at training AI to do art valuations. So one of our largest buyers are corporations, government corporations, crown corporations. So as they build collections for their buildings that they manage. And so you'll be able to log into our marketplace where they can also find artists and actually see the valuation continuing to rise.
Right.
And, you know, because of their connection to the NFT.
Right.
So it will continue to show.
I have been collecting ethnic instruments for, you know, as long as I was able to travel when I was in high school. And to me, the most important part of the instruments is the story behind kind of how I got it. I could go to a music store here in Vancouver and buy quality stuff from a store. I don't know anything about where it came from, and I don't want it necessarily for the sound. I want it for the story. I like to look at it. I like to remember where I met the vendor at some market somewhere in some place, and I talked to them, and maybe they weren't the builder, but they were the friend of the builder helping them sell it or whatever. And the story is so powerful to me. And from what I understand, you know, what you can do with blockchain technology and NFTs is you can kind of solidify the art with the story behind it, because you know who the artist is, you know, maybe some things about them if they're willing to share in the collection. Is this something that you've seen that a lot of collectors are looking for? Absolutely.
And we're actually just videoing now the three of our very first mints that went out. So original and 2 sets of. And so one of our prints just went for $15,000 at auction, which was wonderful. The money all went to the YWCA for that one. But what they get is when we mint the digital copy, on that is the Indigi seal and a QR code. And the QR code is a video of the artist.
Oh, that's cool.
Talking about the teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that just makes it so much more valuable.
Yeah.
To be able to have some kind of interaction with the artist is pretty cool. Can you share some examples of successful collaborations between Indigenous communities and technology that have led to a true positive outcome?
I mean, there's been many if you look at green technology. I won't get into that, but I think our most powerful partner right now is a company called BGIS. And so what they do is they manage government properties and Crown Corporation properties. I think it's 30,000 in Canada.
Properties?
Jeez. Right. So,
yeah.
So they're yeah, exactly. So they're just willing to play with us, I call it. So they were the ones that bought that hooked up the commercial carpet idea. And I think they have 60% of the commercial carpet market. So here you have a company that already has a network of 30,000 corporations in Canada and 50,000 worldwide, I believe.
Wow.
And the money that's exchanging is benefiting them and is benefiting us.
Right.
So there's no charity here. There is a desire to bring technology to concierge building owners of fancy hotels and convention centers, and all of them want to have more Indigenous culture because of reconciliation. So we're solving several problems and everybody's making money.
Right.
And I mean, that's just a beautiful example.
Yeah.
And then they help us sell the limited. So they bought the originals, commissioned it. They get to make their commercial carpets out of that. We got to publish 2 limited edition prints that are high value selling to collectors, and they help us market the prints.
Wow.
So you get paid and then paid again, and then they, you know, they invested and now they're selling these high, I don't know, they're quite in demand. Like I think, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say who's allowed to buy them, but there's already a buzz. We have done no marketing and people are trying to buy these carpets. They haven't even been built yet. So
that's what you want.
It's exactly what we want. And then we started the same commercial art installs. So we do the commercial art install for. I don't know who I'm allowed to talk about. So,
Sure.
but for big corporations,
Yeah.
so they want to have an Indigenous art display. So we're just now working with a gaming company to put in a commercial Indigenous art display, which is interactive with music and QR codes and all of that stuff. The exchange is that they bring their high value, I don't know what they're called, but people that have high net worth into an auction.
Right.
So there's actually no money between the gaming company and us. It's just, again, bringing what we have, which is a high net worth. We have a similar market. So we do an auction, and the auction pays for that install, and we get to commission another round of original artwork.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just so fascinating. So how do regular companies get involved and support these types of projects?
These types, like regular companies in terms of...
Non-Web3 companies.
Non-Web3. Well,
Yeah.
I think our entire point is making it like friendly, because...
To everybody.
Yeah, I mean, corporations, like, how do you get a wallet? It's... we're solving those problems with the corporation. So our marketplace will be available with credit cards, but you will still get the paperwork associated with the art.
Physical paperwork?
Yeah, there's physical paperwork that comes in a certificate of creation, and then also like papers that come showing you like your collection that has been certified on the blockchain.
Yeah.
And then there's an NFT that
Yeah.
goes.
So you have this physical and digital combination, and you're
Yeah.
working with organizations that don't necessarily understand Web3.
Right.
So there's a good bridge there. You're simplifying the process. You're trying to be like, hey, this is not that difficult. We'll walk you through the process and accept your credit card or
Exactly.
whichever payment they can do.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. A lot of times in Web3, we talk about like, well, how are we going to onboard the next 100 million people or whatever, right? And these types of steps are really important to kind of normalize like Web3, and people don't necessarily even need to know that it's like blockchain or that it's Web3, right? It's like people don't understand the internet protocol they currently use. Why do they need to understand the next one? But they certainly need to understand the value of it and how it can really help them or help Indigenous people in this case.
Oh yeah. When Facebook, when Web 2 was created, nobody really went, oh, we're moving from Web.
Right.
And I think that's how Web 3 is going to go.
Yeah.
People say, what's mass adoption? It's when the systems are interactive to a point that it becomes part of your day-to-day life, like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it's exploded. I can't believe how many people are using it.
Yeah.
With some prompts and etc.
Yeah. It's almost like you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you coming in and talking to me. It's been super inspiring to get to know you over the last few months and your team, and I'm excited to see how you guys continue to roll things out, because it's quite powerful.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Great.